But so glad to have everybody join for what I'm sure is going to be a fascinating conversation. I think you can tell I'm really excited about this opportunity. And so just to kind of set the stage a little bit, wanted to share some background on how I got to meet DeAmon Harges and Seana Murphy and Pastor Mike Mather. And they're going to lead us in a great conversation this afternoon. But I first had a chance to connect with first, I think, DeAmon before I met Seana and then Pastor Mike this past summer. And DeAmon and I met actually at a park on the far east side of Indianapolis, and socially distant. And so one of the kind of new opportunities that grew out of last year of ways that people were able to get together and find creative ways to be able to interact with one another. And met DeAmon as a part of thinking through connecting up with different kinds of outreach opportunities and connecting up with a number of leaders in that particular area, the far east side of Indianapolis, who were doing really incredible things in serving the neighborhood, serving the community, and who are in just kind of different roles than particularly we at state government had an opportunity to regularly interact with. And so we had great discussion, and that led to some being able to connect up with Seana Murphy, and both Seana and DeAmon are engaged with the Central Indiana Community Foundation and leading the efforts with the Ambassador Initiative that some folks may be familiar with, some may not be. I'm happy to chat more about that at a different time. But then in our conversations, as we got to know one another more, then DeAmon and Seana were kind enough to share with me Pastor Mather's book, which we've mentioned to folks, and some of you may have had a chance to take a look at, and it's a book called Having Nothing, Possessing Everything. Typically, I would try and do my best Vanna White to then display it in front of me, but I have a good/bad habit of giving all of my copies away to people because I just think a lot of the information and the thought processes, and particularly the questions that are asked, are so valuable to not only ask, but help inform our thought processes as community leaders, and to how we're asking those questions, how we're engaging with our neighbors across our communities and across the state. And so for those of you, if you have read the book, fantastic. I think you're going to see some of the themes that emerge from that discussion around kind of seeing abundant community all around you and how to engage. If you haven't read the book, that's not a prerequisite for today's conversation, because I think that you're just going to find all of this really engaging, and that's probably an even just as well, or maybe even better way to be able to learn. And so this is really more complementary to some of the themes that are discussed there. And this is going to follow our theme throughout the day of being interactive. So please participate in the different questions that are going to be asked. But also, if you have questions along the way, we'll continue to monitor the chat to be able to get those questions to Pastor Mike, to DeAmon and Seana. And then we may have some time at the end. We'll see how the conversations throughout go. But for just a quick bit of background, I hope that some of you may have seen some of the information that we shared, that DeAmon serves as the original roving listener, and I hope that is a title that intrigues you as much as it does me. And I've already learned so much about the value in deep listening that DeAmon brings to the table. And then Seana, and that's been associated with Broadway United Methodist Church, where Pastor Mike was the lead minister for many years, and sadly he has transitioned to Colorado at this point. I say sadly because we wish you were still in Indiana, but I'm very excited for being able to continue to connect up with you. And so great lessons that he learned with his relationship with DeAmon, and then have been applied, I think, in the Broadway community and the Indianapolis community, and probably now being shared elsewhere. And Seana is one of the first people that you meet in Pastor Mike's book, which was fascinating to me. And I joked a little bit with Seana and DeAmon when they provided it to me. I was like, can I have you guys autograph this? And then as I read it, I was like, I really do want to have them autograph it. You guys are rock stars in so many different ways. And I'm just so impressed with all of the leadership that they're providing. So I don't want to take away any more time in this part of the discussion, because all of the insights and the questions that they ask, I think, are just going to be so rich for everyone to be able to enjoy here today. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Seana Murphy to get us started. And hopefully the three of you can share a little bit more background on yourselves throughout today's conversation as well. And I will turn it over to Seana. So thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and Blair, thank you for having us. And I was trying to work on my lighting so you guys could get my total superstar flare, but wasn't able to accomplish my goal there. So my role in this is to set some context. I did some research, and some of the words that were being used to describe this gathering were developing a talent pipeline and research leadership in the community, community development, all those great buzzwords. So to kick off our conversation, I just want to share a couple of stories, because stories about the work is important as we look at how to be innovative. A guy who works here in the city of Indianapolis, Jeff Benedict, references the lack of innovation that happens. And in order to illustrate some of the things that we think about when doing the work, I want to share a few things about myself in these stories. So the first story is 100,000 years ago, hey, Gina, sorry. 100 years ago, I was the state director for the 21st Century Scholars Program. At that time, we had the Gear Up grant. Now, I'm making an assumption, and we can circle back for those who are not aware of the 21st Century Scholars Program. One of the things that we were able to do with the program through the U.S. Department of Education Gear Up dollars was to hire parents to be the people primarily responsible for the recruitment and enrolling of students into the program. When we made the decision to do that, there was lots of uproar around the state at the different support sites, because the questions were, well, what will be the education requirements? How much experience will they bring? The only requirement for the parents to be hired to work as professionals with the 21st Century Scholars Program was that they were parents of children that were enrolled into the program, which bypasses a lot of the requirements that we build in, bypassed a lot of the bureaucracy, the screening, because what we know is that parents were having conversations with each other about how to best support their children and their communities. And that's one part of the program. The other thing that we were able to do is that as we had parent conferences around the state, rather than go through traditional caterers, we talked with parents and found out what they love to do and what they were good at. And so when we had our parent conference up in Elkhart, South Bend area, we paid a parent who loved to cook to cater our lunch and our breakfast. And she did a fantastic job. And for those who are tied to some of the requirements, those economic efficiencies, it was much more economical to hire that parent and support her in what she was good at. The food was fantastic. We were able to pay her for doing that, invest in her talent and what she wanted to do. And she was able to walk away, one, paid, all of us fed, and we made a contribution, and that's community building. The second story that I'll share is at one point in my life in the recent past, I was a vice president of operations for a collective of community of childcare centers. The first thing that I did, and it drove the marketing department crazy, is I eliminated the word need. And all the materials that had been published up to the point of my coming into the position, all the things that was communicated to parents were about, what do you need for your child to be ready for kindergarten? What do you need? Blah, blah, blah. Well, the fact of the matter is we know what they need. If we don't know what the needs are, and we're supposed to be preparing children for entry into public education, then we're the ones with the problem. So I didn't change anything else except to eliminate the word need. And then we ask the question of what are the strengths?
Seana?
Sorry. So we eliminated the word need and we replaced the question with what were you good at as a parent in school? And how do you work with your children from that space? So those are the ways in which we made little changes to large systems and have much better outcomes, to use that lovely language, because we went from a place of what we typically overlook when we are delivering services, building community based around deficits as opposed to assets, dreams, and hopes. DeAmon?
Well, I think I am from Indiana. I was born in South Bend, and my family had been there since the 30s. And one of the things that's interesting listening to Seana is that, and also I wanted to say, I never graduated from high school. I went to South Bend, Washington, but I never graduated. And so the odds of youth folks listening to people like Seana and I, people listen to Mike all the time because he's a pastor, but is not likely.
And he's white.
And he's white. And it's not likely. And I was just thinking about most of the development that brought me to this place have been from my community. And through friendships, those things that aren't based in scarcity. I remember Mike asking me what I haven't heard people in social service ask me, tell me my story. And it was interesting too, because it takes more than just, surveys. It takes trust. It takes believe in people. It takes investing versus charity. So I think that's some of the tenets of the work that we're involved in. But a good story following my neighbor Wildstyle. His name is Keith Paschal, but if you ever see him, his name is Wildstyle. It's probably, I would describe him as an introvert. He's young, but he acts very old, very frugal with his money. And lives a very simple life. He doesn't want a family. He's single. He lives across the street. And when we were creating our little outfit called The Learning Tree, as we were making neighbors, our business partners, Wildstar one day was walking down the street. The first day he got a camera and was taking pictures. And at that moment, I started to realize how true it was. We started talking with each other and becoming neighbors. And I remember me telling him about how many of the neighbors he should meet. And he thought I was crazy. And he was like, and looking in hindsight, when he said that, he said, I'm glad that I was curious enough to follow you. And it's a shame that we sit in a society where images of Black and brown people aren't about abundance. It isn't about sharing people's gifts. And I think one of the things that I would say in this is that even though grassroots people do it, we need to figure out how do we build a system around believing people. And when I came to Indianapolis, one of the things that I followed Reverend Mike here, one of the things that was great, that wasn't about my work, was about a group of people that includes Seana and all the members of Broadway, knowing that things needed to change. They didn't need to know how to change it, but they just needed to publicly say what we were doing wasn't working. And that right there set the course for me and Seana thinking about larger systems. And one of the things that we did in our congregation first was to grieve that we weren't going to do things that weren't working. And it was hard because it was hard to let go of stuff. The stuff that, Mike and Seana will be talking about will be easy. It sounds really fine, but there's work, a lot of work into that. And so getting people to grieve so that they can make room for celebrations. The other thing that was important was this ideal about currency. So fiscal currency needed to be invested. And you heard Shauna's story was a great example of money needed to be redirected. But there were other currencies that we don't talk about, like the value of stories and social capital, social connections, right? Invitation and power, right? And what Shauna's story really illustrated, that we needed to examine the currencies we do have. That includes fiscal and invested in that. And then thinking about outcomes differently. So we didn't, because we're in a new place, it was unfair for us to say we're going to give an outcome, to promise something, right? So what our outcome was is to discover something new. And so that became important in our work. And it allowed that the work that me and Sean have been doing for years to say, we can feed it into something, create a pipeline, because we have a structure that supports people's gifts. Mike, get off mute.
Thank you, DeAmon. Sorry. Thank you both for the instruction to get off mute for what you said. So I, building off of what Seana and DeAmon have been saying, I came out of graduate school in 1985 and wanted to work in and among people who didn't have much money. And because what every community of color that's low income and low wealth needs is a 25-year-old with 19 years of education who can solve all their problems. That's what I thought, and that's how I thought it was going to be helpful. And I was in congregations that, did good things in low income communities. We ran after school programs, we ran summer programs, we ran feeding programs, all that stuff. And all the funders ever asked us was, how many contact hours did you have? How much food did you distribute? How many volunteers did you have? Things like that. They never asked, did anything actually get better, right? And I didn't even think about that. I was being asked to evaluate things, not based on whether it actually did any good, but whether it delivered some things that weren't what they call in the field, right, deliverables, that weren't telling us whether anything was actually working. And I had a dramatic realization of that at one point, and so I was serving a church in South Bend, Indiana, and a low-income community on the southeast side of South Bend. And we had a food pantry at our little church. And when people came to the food pantry, we asked people the type of information that funders wanted to know, right? And in this case, the Red Cross wanted to know, how much income do people have and how much expenses? So people would say, well, my income's $600 a month and my expenses are $1,200 a month. Well, we could do a lot with that information, right? No, we couldn't do anything with that for one person, much less. So we took that information and it sat in a file cabinet. Well, we in June of 1992, we're sitting around talking after church at a lunch, and this woman says, "You said that Peter, reading from the book of the prophet Joel, says that God's Spirit flows down on all people, young and old, women and men." And I thought, man, what a wonderful preacher I am. It's a half an hour later and she remembers what I said. I'm great. And I said, that's right, that's right. And she says, so how come you don't treat people like that? And it was like the air went out of the room. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, when people come to the food pantry, you ask people how poor they are. If you believe God's Spirit flow down on all people, young and old, women and men, how come you aren't treating people like that? I don't know. And so we started changing what we asked people. The very next day, we asked people 10 pages of questions about what their gifts were. We weren't asking them anymore what they didn't have. What we asked people was what they did have, right? So we asked people 10 pages of questions. Have you taken care of older folks? Have you taken care of children? Are they members of your family? Is it because you're helping somebody out? I mean, I've been trained. I grew up in small towns in southern Indiana, in Huntingburg and French Lick and Whiteland. I'd gone to seminary outside New York City. I went to college in Evansville, Indiana. I knew that these Black and brown and poor folks that I was around, they needed my help because I knew the answers to things, right? But instead now here, I'm asking people, what are your gifts? And all of a sudden people are telling me all sorts of things they're good at. Their gifts are in. One of the first people who came to us was a little woman about 5 feet tall, lived a half a block from the church, named Adele Almaguer. And she told us she was a good cook. So we said, prove it. She said, what do you mean? Cook for the custodian, secretary, and lunch and pastor lunch on Friday. So she cooked for us. It was great. Leadership of the neighborhood organization was meeting. We said, don't meet somewhere else. Let Adele cook for you here. And she cooked for them and she fed them and they paid her for it. She cooked for 3 things over the next 9 months. Studebaker Elementary had a PTA meeting in our neighborhood, Southeast Side Neighborhood Health Center had an open house, Memorial Hospital had a press conference. They all needed food. She provided it. The South Bend Chamber of Commerce wanted to have an all-day meeting of their leadership program in our church building. And we said, you can do that. They said, since we're going to be there all day, we need to use your kitchen. We said, you can use our kitchen, but we would prefer you use our caterer. Oh, we took $20 and bought her 1,000 business cards, said La Chaparrita Catering, spunky Tex-Mex food. And she fed 70 of the business and civic leaders in the community. They passed out her business card to everybody there. Through that, she got connected to the Michiana Businesswomen's Association. And a year and a half later, she opened up Adelita's Fajitas at the corner of 8th and Harrison in Elkhart. Now, if we had asked her how poor you are, we would have ended up a lot poorer for it, and we would have missed a lot of awesome food. All of a sudden, it was like, well, this is what I believe. This is what I believe in my own life. How come I don't believe this in other people's lives? Because I've been trained in this church way, in this social service way of looking at people as people who needed help rather than people who had something to offer, not only to their own lives, but to the world. And so I just began thinking about everything in a new way. And the gift, so I want to say a word about both DeAmon and Seana here. So one of the things that DeAmon would always do whenever we saw each other, and when he moved down to Indianapolis shortly after I did, he would stop by my office every day and he would say, oh, Mike, I just met this guy at the corner of 32nd and Park, and he sits on his front porch and he plays chess every day, and the young people all gather around. Now, you know, I know that the people in my church are in my neighborhood are poor and needy, but DeAmon was seeing them as people who are doing amazing things, right? He said, oh, I just ran into this local group of young people and they were standing at 31st and Broadway, and one of them's a cook and one of them's a poet and one of them's a musician and one of them's a mechanic. Everybody else called them at-risk youth. Right? And when we called them at-risk youth, then we didn't see what they had to offer. When I would fill out a grant request, it would always say, what's the need you're trying to address? And I would write in there, the biggest need in our neighborhood is to be needed, because that's the biggest need for all of us. But the truth is that our systems work against that. And the truth is that the systems that I was working in, were working against that and trying to find ways to begin to restructure things, both inside our church and outside in public policy, that started paying attention to what people have to offer. Just think about if you showed up for work every day and the first question everybody asked you was, tell me what's wrong with you. It's a lousy way to do it. And DeAmon was seeing all the time these gifts of people. The first time I met Seana, it took me a long time to learn the lesson that I saw from her. But I mean, over and over, I saw her, like, she wrote a poem for Christmas one year for every household on her block. She had back from college and she wrote a poem to celebrate and talk about the gifts of the people in each of those houses. We had never done that at the church. No organization had ever done that. She saw that. She was recognizing, because these people are her family. She knows them. And we don't treat people like family, right? We treat people like people to be served, or people who are needy, rather than people who are needed. And so through both Seana and DeAmon, I've learned a lot to see the world for the riches it has. Anyway, Seana, back to you.
Well, thank you, Michael. So there's some practical application to the things that we've been sharing, and I want to get to that because I know that that's important. The first thing is that what Mike and DeAmon and I were able to do, and what I would ask you to do, is think about the questions that you're currently asking. And think about, how do you rephrase the question to still get the information that you're needing, that you need. The other thing is, what are you doing with the information that you collect? What we found in some work that we're doing with a group of community members in Columbus, Indiana, is that when the pandemic hit and they had to start doing things in a different way, the number of questions went down significantly, and they realized that the majority of the questions being asked were unnecessary, but was just an extension of a programming that they were carrying forward in their work. The other thing is, think about, how do you celebrate people as they come into your organization? What things are celebrated? Everybody likes a good party, and we throw a lot of them. I mean, we did. We can't so much anymore. But what role does celebration play in the work that you are doing? And then innovation. What does innovation look like in the spaces that you occupy? And finally, what DeAmon pointed to, and something he and I and Blair have talked a lot about, is, what is the difference between outcomes and discoveries? And what drives that? And depending on how you're funded or whatever, I'm sure that the word outcome is used a lot, the word deliverables is used a lot, and that's fine. But it's also okay to interject different language around the work that you're doing, because you're not working with widgets. You're working with people. And if you're not discovering anything in that process, there's something woefully wrong. And these are small things. These are things that systems are sustained by people. These are the small things that help shape and inform the way a system will look 10, 15, 20 years from now. And the other thing I'll say, and then give it to DeAmon and Mike, is, if changing is not your jam, be honest about that. It's only fair to be honest that, we've been doing this for 20 years. We've got 20 more years of doing it this way. Just be honest and fair, so that when people enter, they can manage their expectations in terms of what the experience will be.
Seana?
Sir?
Can I ask you something about that?
$25, yes.
It's in your PayPal account right now.
Okay, go for it.
If people do want to change, one of the things, right? This is the challenge, is you talk about celebrating, but how do you make room for that? Everybody's busy, right?
Yeah.
Do you add something new to the list of things? Don't you have to give up some things?
Well,
yeah.
That's where we
Go for it, DeAmon. That's $25 for you too.
Okay. Well, you've been prepaid.
Okay.
I was just thinking that is the most important part of re-examining the current structures you do have, because if you're going to take on a new venture, I talked about grieving earlier. And one of the things that I learned from our congregants and people on the committees that you have to shift things. And if you look at Broadway United Methodist used to be the largest church in Indiana, and not just the largest United Methodist church, but the largest in its heyday, I think the 40s and 50s. And when I got there, they were still acting like that, even though it was like 800 people. And it left 187 committee slots. And the thing that they were doing is doing things because it was fit for another time. So re-examine your structures. And in that, if your structures don't, in human service work, don't support complexity, human complexity, right? Like people don't live on bread alone, so they don't just have need, right? Mike said they need to be needed. And if your money is going to things, Seana and I right now are working on with some CARES Act money, helping, working with neighbors to pay neighbors' bills. And it's a struggle because that it's going to be a never ending cycle. People are always going to need. But what is the other side of that? Change the question about gifts. The other is I noticed that this screen, besides, I can't, it's a couple people on here, but it's really white.
Mm-hmm.
It's very white. And so in that, there's some things you need to change in your rooms, but there's also things you have that you can be used. I love that Mike has the currency of interrupting systems, right? That the other thing he has is a lot of social capital. And in that, you have a responsibility to make connections, right? So a practice that we do is that Blair's been part of it. Hey, Blair, I need you to talk and take some people to meet my friend, Peter Block, right? And we have to do those and introduce people. We also do that with our neighbors. When Seana talked about the parties, when you have a party, it's going to be a lot of Black people, but you're going to have the president of the CICF, Central Indiana Community Foundation. You may have Blair there, and their jobs is to figure out how they can give their social capital away. The other is, I feel like when it comes to money, we have to really believe and treat people with dignity, that they don't just need training programs, they need investments. And in that, we're not just thinking about an ROI, we're thinking about a return on community, or ROC. So what are the people that live around you are contributing, that are saving other people's lives? Invest in that.
Yeah, and DeAmon, what you raise is really important in terms of the questions that are being asked. So, when you look around your room and everybody looks like you, or everyone has the same education background or the same economic background, then the question is, who are we not talking to and why? And what are the risks if we step outside of that? And what are the risks if we stay in this? That's an important question. Before you get out into the community, it requires my favorite Socratic self-interrogation. You got to ask yourself some questions. Otherwise, you're at risk of doing harm. And that's the first rule, is do no harm. So what are the risks when you start asking those questions? And then what are the risks if you decide to act or not act? Because we can ask and answer questions all day and feel really good having taken that step. But the next step in the process is the important step, is how do we act on this internally and then externally? The other thing I'll say is that when it was determined that we were going to bring parents on as full partners in the work of the 21st Century Scholars Program, and all the brouhaha that jumped off around that because it had not been done before in that way, I will tell you, it was not an easy journey to get to the point where it did happen. And so you have to have good people around you, and you have to have courage, and you got to be a little bit crazy, because I could have very easily pulled back away from that because I got my behind handed to me 32 times over. But it was the most important thing that we were able to do when we start talking in terms of real community development. making that financial investment, the training investment, all the investments that were made into those families. The Scholars Program has morphed and changed 1,000 times since I was there, but there are communities all across the state that are still talking about how to help their kids go to college because they had opportunities to learn how to maneuver those systems.
And here is some language ideas that might help you on the way. We never use the word empower.
Oh God, no.
Because people have power, and I know that's a word that we have, but what we do is recognize the power that people have. The other is, love what Seana said, if you got the word need, unless it's about people being needed, don't use it, right? And what we've discovered, and Seana is super brilliant at this, is that those type of things actually go to changing policy. So like in Indianapolis now, housing policy is being changed right now by residents, right? And it's going to affect, and not only the policy that's written, but the way things will operate and the way government, city government will actually have to behave with their peoples, their masters, the residents, right? Mike, you wanted to say?
No, I'm listening. I'm good. Did we want to take any questions or anything?
Yeah.
Well, and I'll help field questions in just a second, but as folks may be thinking a little bit about some of that, I also want to pose one kind of to the group that has come from conversations with the three of you, and kind of some of the questions you've asked me and prompted along the way. Is that, you know, and people can submit this in the chat if you feel so compelled, that there's the question of thinking about what's a talent that you have that maybe nobody else knows that you have it. And just think on that for a second. And like I said, you can submit it into the chat, but think about how when that kind of a question gets asked to you, then how does that make you feel about being able to think about yourself and what you bring to the world around you? And kind of coming back to something John mentioned earlier today, of that, you know, our work is really about improving communities, improving access to opportunity, but improving the human condition. And so when we can think about how we're asking these questions, and to what DeAmon just said, and Pastor Mike and Seana as well, about people being needed, when you're asking those kinds of questions, then it's a totally different experience for somebody getting to be a part of the work that everybody in this room I know is so passionate about serving. So just wanted to kind of set that up for everyone as well. And you know, open the floor up for folks to be able to ask some questions of Seana, DeAmon, and Pastor Mike, since they are a wealth of talents themselves and information. And so I think everybody has access. You can unmute yourself, or if you want to submit something in the chat. And so I'm trying to multitask of read.
Blair, while you're looking at, there's a few questions in the chat. It looks like Bill has raised his hand. So Bill, you
Thanks, and thank you for letting me join in across the Atlantic. I'm here in Northeast England, and we were privileged to have Mike stay with us for a short while a few years ago. One of the things I've found, and this might be more of a kind of statement than a question, but when we put into practice this thing about saying to people, what are you good at? What can you offer? One of the things we found is that people were so enthusiastic about doing what they were good at with other people. The spin-off was a huge growth in relationships because people enjoyed being around people who were enjoying what they were doing. And so they got involved, and it built up these kind of little mini communities within communities of people who would work together. And so the return on community from that investment of somebody doing something that they were good at was much bigger than we thought it would be in the currency of relationships that were being built. And I just wanted to kind of encourage people to adopt this approach, because it really does pay dividends in community terms.
Can I just add that, so DeAmon mentioned the program that we are currently running now. And two of the required questions on the paperwork is what brings you and your family joy? And what are your gifts and what talents do you want to share with the community? You can't submit if you don't answer those questions. And what we find is people pause because they're so unaccustomed to being asked that. But once they start asking, you get whole paragraphs of stuff. But it's equally as important as asking someone for their driver's license or social security number. The other thing I'll say is one of our guiding principles is that we don't ask for that information if we're not prepared to act on it. And so we are taking that is rich, that is data rich, and we build on that through our ambassador program across the communities.
Again, Shauna, right? Because if you ask somebody what gifts they have to share and then you never come back to them, it would be better if you never asked, right? Because that's discouraging to people.
And I will say that after having kind of connected up with some of these different questions, I think many people in the room here do a variation of mentoring or career coaching, and some to different degrees than others. I've completely changed how I ask questions of rather than assuming that somebody may necessarily know what it is that they want to be able to do or what career area they want to go into. I try and start with the question of, similar to the question about, what kind of talents might you have that nobody else knows about? What are 3 things that you could teach right now? And that, I think that starts to tell a little bit around interest areas, passions that people have. And so then using those kinds of questions to inform, well, how might that fit with a career area that and skill sets that might be present already? How can we build off of those kinds of things to make sure that people are getting connected to the different kinds of opportunities, and that our community is then informed with that insight to invest in this person to be able to get to some of those things that were just mentioned, of the return on community, and instead of just an individual return on investment. Any other, we're getting close here on our time, but I want to make sure that if there's other opportunities that any questions that people may have to be able to ask here. Anybody else got their hand raised?
So I'm smart enough to know how to raise my hand. So I'm just going to jump in. The observation that we are so white is so true. And I've been raised in a pretty much all white community. And my current community is 85% white. So I feel at a real loss about how to enter into this sphere of being more inclusive. And more open to that, because I just don't know enough. So I didn't know if you guys could later share in the Dropbox maybe other resources, so that I'm not unintentionally stupid, and get better at it. And then the other thing was on our dashboards. Our dashboards are very metric oriented. Have we given any thought of how to include stories in those?
That's a great point. Go ahead, Blair.
I was just going to say, I love that question, because I think it comes back to the discussion around, how do we look at discoveries as well as outcomes that we're wanting to connect people up with, but just the things that we're able to learn along the way. How do we create space for us to celebrate those discoveries and ask more questions along the way? And so I think that can be, and maybe that's something we want to include in the next conversation that looks at some of our dashboards and tools that we have there of, how can we make space for the learnings that we're going to find that we just don't know to ask some of those questions until we start engaging more with some of those individuals.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about diversity and inclusion. Part of the reason why I wanted to tell people I didn't have my high school diploma, I plan not to get one either. But is that I have a disability. And when we talk about inclusion, that is usually left out, intersecting, especially not only in just Black communities and brown communities, but low income communities. And I've done a lot of projects with groups that are work with disability. And the thing that no one ever asks them is how they're needed. And so part of that, I think, to answer that, systems can't do that part, but communities can. And so how do you start to find people who are listeners, people who go and know people, connectors, that know people on the margins? Then two, who throws the best parties, right? Who are the people that include people? Even in a less diverse community, you'll find there's more diversity than you know. And then who is the philanthropist? Who are the people who naturally give that we don't see? And those are the people you look for to help you. There's good reading resources, but this type of thing you have to live into. You have to put your body into that. And those are the three, and healers, people who help people through grief, like our friend January that lives in our neighborhood. That is who you need to bring as your resource, and start using development through people.
I just want to add that before we get off of here, language matters. So you heard DeAmon say that we don't say empower, because that assumes a lack of power. We say empower, I-N, power. We don't say return on investment. We say return on community, because you guys use community development in your own descriptors of what it is that you're doing. You use talents. So that comes from an assumption that you're making a return on community. Again, think about the questions that you are asking, and think about the way we use deliverables. We don't use deliverables. We say discoveries. Even as you maneuver in the systems that are already present, language matters. And you've already used that language here in this conversation. Start using the language, because that can help move change a lot faster than what we think about sometimes.
When we
I
have
was
a
wondering if DeAmon can address, maybe with a story, how he has seen this asset-based approach influence policy, because I think a lot of times we have community development folks who love to live in community, and we get scared of doing policy work. And then we have policy people who are not translating that work between us and among us. And so I think a story or two about how you've seen policy impacted by this asset-based approach would be powerful for this group.
Yes, so it's really short, but Seana could share one too, because we both involved in a couple. But I mentioned to you my neighbor Wild Style earlier. He's a hip hop producer. He hangs out with young people of color that probably won't ever end in these type of meetings or settings unless they're a client, right? And I told you Wild Style takes his camera around. And one of the things he started as he developed his gift and his power of currency, that currency of story, he started writing. And as we would go around to neighborhoods, he would poke out and realize that was lacking in my stories is proof. Like, I didn't need proof, I had proof. But he'd start taking photographs of those, and he started hiring young men to tell stories. He realized that part of what his role is, as he got upset about stuff, he would tell great stories. So he wrote a story that is on the national. He wrote 3 blogs, and the first one was called The Ethnic Cleansing of Black Indianapolis. Broke the record at New America. A dude that's a mechanic and hip hop producer. Well, because of the currency of connection, Wild Style in his work started being connected to people. The head of the hospitals at IU Health, they shared the photography together, and he met other people, the deputy mayor, and people start reading his blog. It even got to where people won't do anything around development unless they talk to Wild Style and his neighbors. So, and I mean, and right now there's a community in our community. There's a group of people, a group of us who's purchasing a city block, right? And in that, the mayor's office is thinking about creating an office for equitable development, meaning that there will be residents and stakeholders sitting there talking about, is this displacing people? That came out of originally saying, hey, my name is DeAmon. Who are you? I'm Wild Style. What do you do? I'm a photographer. Now, it took 5 years, but that is something that's going on now for us.
Yeah. And just real briefly, what's happening right now, literally as we speak, my inbox is blowing up. Residents saw a problem with the way that traditional institutions were allegedly helping people, and had opportunity to have an audience with one of the people in the mayor's office. And out of that, this project that we're running now, we put money in the hands of residents to help other residents. And out of that, we've developed a process that will be replicated by CHIP, that will be pushed for our community, what are they called, DeAmon? Because we have bad names for service centers, community centers, those people, yeah.
And Seana, dollar-wise, that followed that on both projects that's connected to each other, there have been, we haven't even got a tally, but there are millions of dollars that got shifted into people's hands.
And what's important in all of that is when we say we put money in people's hands, we literally gave other people money. And because we trust people, we didn't ask them to prove to us that you are poor. I mean, you think about it, when you need something in a personal space, it's hard as I'll get out to go and say, hey, let me get on for $5 or $10. Some of y'all may have never had that experience, but think about the difficulty. So why would we take people through an exercise of proving to us that they are poor, that they have the need? They say, we need food. Here's money. Go buy your food. I'm the worst person to send to a grocery store. You do not want me to do that for you.
Amen.
So, okay. So it's a matter, do we trust, do we believe, and do we have faith?
Well, I'm so sorry that I think we're going to have to wrap up this really rich conversation, and the good news is that there's an opportunity to continue having some conversations around some of these themes. The Indiana Talent Network is in the process of hosting a book discussion amongst different folks, and so happy to welcome more partners to that conversation. And so Gina Burdell will share some information a little bit later about the gathering there. But again, if you're wanting to dig in a little bit further on some of the key themes, some of the questions that as examples that can be asked, the book that Pastor Mather has shared is called Having Nothing, Possessing Everything. And so there's great resources to be had there. We're very excited to be able to continue working with the Learning Tree. And when I say we, I mean the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, to be able to think about how we are serving as that conduit for asking some different questions, bringing some different types of perspectives and experiences to our policy conversations as well. So happy to bring you along that journey for us as well. We're continuing to gather discoveries and learnings all along the way. And so this is hopefully planting some seeds for everybody who is in this conversation, but we want to continue to be a resource for you to connect up to great leaders like Seana, DeAmon, and Pastor Mike. And a huge thank you to the three of them for joining us today, for all the work that you are leading and for sharing your experiences and insights that I think are so transformative and so valuable for helping us to improve the human condition. So